In 2007, Goldman Sachs designed a financial product they already knew would fail, then sold it to their own clients. Those clients lost over $1 billion. Goldman profited. Not one executive faced criminal charges. The emails proving they knew still exist. They knew, and they buried it. So why has no one ever told you this? The world has always given Goldman Sachs a specific kind of respect. They produce treasury secretaries. When Goldman touches a deal, the assumption is that Goldman is the adult in the room, the institution that does not make mistakes. That image was not accidental. Goldman spent decades curating it. They dressed it in credentials and discretion, and the kind of reputation that makes regulators nervous to ask hard questions. And in 2007, they used that reputation as cover. Here is what happened behind closed doors. A hedge fund manager named John Paulson approached Goldman with a specific request. Paulson had already decided the American housing market was about to collapse. To profit from that collapse, he needed someone to build the other side of the trade. Goldman would create a package of mortgage-backed securities, home loans bundled and sold as investments. Goldman would market those packages to their own clients as a legitimate product. Paulson would bet against them. When the underlying mortgages defaulted, Paulson would cash out. The clients would lose. Goldman agreed. The product was called Abacus 2007 AC1. A Goldman vice president named Fabrice Touré was the architect. In an email to a colleague in January 2007, Touré called himself Fabulous Fab, standing in the center of complex trades he had created without, in his own words, necessarily understanding all the implications. 9 months later, Abacus had lost 99% of its value. But that's not even the part they really didn't want out. The investors Goldman sold Abacus to were not ordinary people. They were institutional banks, a German firm called IKB and a Dutch bank called ABN AMRO, sophisticated players who trusted Goldman's process entirely. What they were never told was that the hedge fund betting against the product had helped select the underlying mortgages, the ones most likely to default. Goldman's marketing materials mentioned an independent portfolio selection agent. They did not mention Paulson, not once. When the SEC opened an investigation, Goldman's initial position was that the product was legitimate and that both sides of the trade were fully understood. Then the emails came out. Now, the real scale. Abacus 2007 AC1 generated approximately $1.2 billion in total investor losses. IKB lost $150 million. ABN AMRO, which had been acquired by the Royal Bank of Scotland, lost $900 million losses that eventually landed on the British government, which bailed out RBS with £85 billion of public money. That chain matters. Goldman built a product designed to collapse. The damage traveled from a conference room in Lower Manhattan through Amsterdam into Edinburgh and landed on British taxpayers who had never heard of Fabulous Fab and never would. Meanwhile, John Paulson pocketed $1 billion from the single trade. Goldman earned fees for building the instrument that buried their own clients. Why did no one pay? In 2010, the SEC charged Goldman Sachs with fraud. Goldman settled for $550 million, the largest Wall Street penalty in history at the time. No admission of wrongdoing. No criminal charges. Fabrice Touré was eventually found civilly liable in 2013. He paid a fine, earned a PhD in economics, and became a university professor. Lloyd Blankfein, Goldman's CEO throughout all of this, stayed at the firm for 11 more years, collected hundreds of millions in total compensation, and stepped down in 2018 to quiet applause. The $550 million fine sounds significant until you know that Goldman's revenue that same year was $39 billion. They paid 1.5 cents on every dollar they made, and then they moved on. The agencies that investigated Goldman were staffed in key positions by Goldman alumni, a revolving door that was documented, noted, and then accepted because at some point the industry and the government agreed to stop calling it a conflict and start calling it experience. Dodd-Frank passed. Dodd-Frank was rolled back. The structure that made Abacus possible was not dismantled. It was adjusted. There is a word for when a company designs a product it knows will fail, sells it to its own clients, bets against it through a third party, profits when it collapses, and then settles for less than 2% of annual revenue with no admission of guilt. That word is business. The next time Goldman Sachs is presented to you as the steadiest hand in the room, the institution governments call when things get serious, ask yourself one question: who benefits when the public believes that story? Because Goldman always had the answer to that one.